This is written in the request from the federal police. I had access to the federal police's request for these searches and seizures and for an arrest. In a moment, I'll tell you who was arrested. So the federal police found strong indications that the senator, former Bolsonaro minister Ciro Nogueira, received undue advantage to help Daniel Vorcaro in the whole situation of the Banco master fraud. Andrea Gonçalves, what is this? What crime? Corruption. When you accept or receive any kind of undue advantage to do or not do something you are supposed to do, that's corruption. And the federal police said that very likely Ciro Nogueira received undue advantage and helped Daniel Vorcaro in carrying out the Banco master fraud. This fraud could reach 100 billion reais, the biggest banking fraud in Brazil, maybe even in the world. That's why now we can make a little more sense of some things. For example, who was the author of the amendment that became known as the Master Amendment? Do you remember? I remember. Why? Because the amendment was absurd. Who wrote that amendment? Ciro Nogueira. Ciro Nogueira, in a proposed constitutional amendment that had nothing to do with the case, went ahead and inserted an amendment into the proposal. A proposal to convert one of Lula's provisional measures into law. He went ahead and inserted this amendment into it, trying to sneak the amendment through quietly. What did it provide? Ciro Nogueira's amendment at the time stated that the credit guarantee fund in the event of a bank failure would not pay the clients only up to 250,000 reais as it is today. But it would pay the insurance in the event of a bank failure up to 1 million reais. What does that mean in practice, Andrea Gonçalves? It means that clients, Andrea Gonçalves, would have greater coverage from the credit guarantee fund, right? It's because if the credit guarantee fund increased, Banco Master could continue committing fraud. Why? Because it would have more credit headroom to carry out the fraud. He wasn't concerned about guaranteeing the payment of the client of a bank that might eventually fail. He was concerned about giving a greater margin so that Banco Master could continue. Concerned with creating more leeway since the credit guarantee fund would pay even more to clients. That's what was behind this amendment. But this amendment was so bad that even the Senate itself said, Ciro, we can't pass this here. There's no way we can pass this here. And look, at the time when Ciro tried to get this passed, the banking federation and the institution itself, which is an insurance, which is the credit guarantor, where all the banks in Brazil, to operate, it needs authorization from the central bank. And who gave authorization for Banco Master to operate? Who was it? Bolsonaro government. Campos Neto. And every month, the banks need to deposit an amount into this credit guarantee fund, which is a private entity. This credit guarantee fund notified the central bank, and it was right around the time when Ciro Nogueira tried to get this approved here. Look, central bank, Banco Master isn't paying into the insurance fund. If Banco Master goes bankrupt, there won't even be a way to pay the clients. It's not paying into the insurance fund. And the Brazilian Federation of Banks, FEBRABAN, also notified the central bank, who André Campos Neto, who was the president of the central bank appointed by Bolsonaro. Look, they're not paying the guarantee fund. And why is that? Then you might ask, Andre, but why did the Banking Federation do that? Because if Banco Master went bankrupt, all the banks would have to bear the loss and pay since Master wasn't depositing money. Then they got worried and went to inform the central bank. And it was right around this time that Ciro Nogueira tried to help by approving a measure that would give Banco Master more leeway to keep committing fraud. Doesn't this look like a handout to Master or not? Here's the thing. To make matters worse, we find out that the biggest donor to Bolsonaro's campaign was, guess who? Fabiano Zettel. Fabiano Zettel, brother-in-law of Daniel Vorcaro, who was the financial agent behind the entire Banco Master fraud scheme. Who? Andre. Fabiano Zettel. Brother-in-law of Daniel Vorcaro, married to his sister. He handled all the financial matters. And this Fabiano Zettel, who is also in prison, Daniel Vorcaro is also in prison, was the biggest donor to Bolsonaro's 2022 campaign. He donated 3 million as an individual to Bolsonaro's account, Bolsonaro's electoral account in 2022. And he was also the biggest donor to whose campaign? Of Bolsonaro's biggest ally at the time. The candidate for governor of the state of São Paulo, Tarcísio de Freitas. He donated 2 million reais, depositing it into Tarcísio de Freitas' personal campaign account. This means that they were interested especially in Bolsonaro remaining president of the republic. Why? Why did he have that interest? Thank you. Is this Bolsa or Master or not? And to make things worse, there was Campos Neto. Campos Neto. He was appointed by Bolsonaro in 2019 as president of the central bank. And it was the central bank under Campos Neto, who was appointed by Bolsonaro, that authorized Banco Maxima, it was called Maxima, to become Banco Master and to start operating throughout the entire financial system. In fact, it was also during Bolsonaro's government with the Ministry of Social Security, notably under Onyx Lorenzoni and others. That's when Banco Master was also authorized to lend money to retirees and pensioners, thousands of whom were victims of fraud. In other words, Banco Master is involved in banking fraud that could reach between 50 and 100 billion reais. It's also involved in INSS fraud, where they got authorization to make deductions from retirees and pensioners during Bolsonaro's government with the approval of Bolsonaro's Minister of Economy, the Central Bank, and the Minister of Social Security, Onyx Lorenzoni, and other advisors, all from Bolsonaro's time. Maybe that explains why they were interested in having Bolsonaro remain as president of the republic. And that's why he was the biggest donor to Bolsonaro's 2022 election campaign. And make no mistake, all this dismantling of this criminal organization is only happening because we have Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva as president of the republic. Otherwise, all this mess, all this fraud, this whole situation would continue. Are you done, Andrea? It's not over. Then to make things even worse, look here. To make things even worse for them, right? Because for the federal police, it's a connecting link. Who buys a mansion worth 6 million reais, which actually costs 14 million? Flávio Bolsonaro. And who lends this money to Flávio Bolsonaro? Andrea Goncalves, Banco Master? No. It wasn't Banco Master that lent money to Flávio Bolsonaro. There are interest rates well below market rates. It was BRB. BRB is a public bank linked to the government of the federal district, which had the Bolsonaro supporter Ibanez Rocha as governor. Andrea Goncalves, so what does one thing have to do with the other? I don't understand. If it's not Banco Master, it's BRB. What does one thing have to do with the other? Calm down. Don't get nervous. Don't be anxious. What's going on? This public bank, BRB, which is a kind of federal savings bank, but linked to the federal district, unlike the federal savings bank, which is linked to the federal government, BRB went there and bought it. More than 12 billion reais from Banco Master. all bad stocks. What is that, Andrea? Bad stocks. There's stocks that don't come with any guarantee. There's actually money behind them. Actually, they're promises of payment. They're debts to be collected. And nobody buys credit like that, guys, because it's highly risky. The risk is very high. And the public bank, which can't take that kind of risk, went ahead and injected more than 12 billion into that devil, Daniel Vocaro. Billions of reais in public money. And it went and bought almost all of Banco Master. This same bank had Paulo Henrique as its director, who is now in prison. Paulo Henrique, an ally of the Bolsonarist governor Ibanez Rocha. He was the one who approved it. Everything here in the heat of the Banco Master fraud, scamming everyone, committing fraud, stealing from retirees and pensioners, and getting rich with money from everywhere. And Senator Ciro Nogueira is everywhere. Rudiano, Bolsonaro's minister, Italy and stuff and everything. He went and got a loan. He was supposed to pay it off in 20 or 40 years, but he's already paid off the house, which was under invoiced. Because actually that house didn't cost 6 million, it cost 14 million. You might say, Andrea Gonçalves, this is all just a coincidence. Andrea Gonçalves, did you take your medicine today? Oh my God, I'm going to ask you guys, is this a Bolso master or not? Because the Bolsonaro supporters are trying to blame the left for this fraud. There's no getting around it. You know what? There's no getting around it means there's no getting around it. This fraud has a clear and specific source, and it's Bolso Master. And the knocking has already started. Knock, knock. At the high-level senator of the Republic, former minister in Bolsonaro's government, chief of staff, Ciro Nogueira was inside Bolsonaro's office, who was visited by the federal police. So the police are carrying out 10 search and seizure warrants. And one of these warrants is at the house of Senator Ciro Nogueira, I repeat, former minister in Bolsonaro's government. This context I'm giving you is so you can understand. Because there are a lot of people out there who don't want you to see reality. And they try to link the left with this fraud, but so far there's no way. And he was arrested. There was an arrest warrant issued of Daniel Borcaro's cousin. So he's under arrest. Daniel Borcaro, Fabiano Zettello. Daniel Borcaro's brother-in-law, his business partner who donated money to Bolsonaro, 3 million. Paulo Henrique is under arrest. The former president of BRB, ally of Ibanez Rocha. Speaking of which, where is Ibanez Rocha? And now Daniel Borcaro's cousin is also under arrest. He was arrested here. Felipe Casado Borcaro. Federal police arrest Felipe Casado Borcaro, cousin of the owner of Banco Master, in the 5th phase of Operation Accomplice Zero. So his cousin was just arrested too. Andre, is this the master grant? No, it's not over yet. You're in too much of a hurry. You're too impatient. Calm down, calm down, calm down, calm down. The governor's law, Bolsonarist Ibanez Rocha, that the people are looking for. Where is he, by the way? Where is Ibanez Rocha? He resigned, right? And he's already gone. Nobody knows where he is. They say he's on vacation. Nobody knows where he is. The senator, not senator, governor of the federal district, whose ally, the president of BRB, is in jail. And he's spilling the beans too. He's also entering into a cooperation deal. Daniel Borcar is also entering into a cooperation deal. The first documents Daniel Borcar submitted for the cooperation deal were rejected by both the federal police and the prosecutor general's office. He must truly spill the beans and give up everything, or it won't be accepted. He also needs to reveal the source to recover money. At the very least, the Federal Supreme Court wants to recover at least 50 billion reais. Otherwise, there's nothing to talk about. Yeah, that's right. So what happens? There's another governor. The governor, a supporter of Bolsonaro. Yeah, Andrea Gonçalves. That's right. Another Bolsonaro supporter. Claudio Castro, former governor of Rio de Janeiro, ousted and ineligible, soon a prisoner. I don't know who will be arrested first. Daniel Valcaro was already arrested. I don't know if Ibanez Rocha will be arrested first. Former governor of the federal district, who, by the way, is being sought. Nobody knows where he is, or if it will be the former governor of Rio de Janeiro, already impeached and ineligible. I'm starting to suspect it will be Claudio Castro. Yeah, Andrea Gonçalves? Yes. What did Claudio Castro do while he was governor? This is just about Banco Master. I'm not even talking about other situations that I'll mention in a bit. Bolsonaris, shootings, beatings, and bombs. Good criminal is a dead criminal. All of that, all these people here. He took almost $1 billion that was in the pension fund for public servants in Rio de Janeiro. For what? To guarantee the retirement and pension of public servants. Isn't there Social Security? Social Security is the general Social Security system. If you're a formally employed worker, if you have a registered job, every month when you get your salary, doesn't it show the deduction for Social Security? That's right. The money that's deducted from you goes to Social Security, which is a fund that will ensure that in the future, when you need it, you'll be able to retire. Or you'll have a survivor's pension or other benefits like sickness or accident benefits and so on. Isn't that right? Exactly. Public servants, many public servants create their own pension system. So they don't have to be part of Social Security. So what do public servants do? They create an institute that's linked to the city hall if it's a municipality or to the state if it's a state, where every month public servants have their pension contributions deducted. They also have the pension contribution taken from their salary, and it goes into this fund, into this account, so that in the future, when needed, this public servant is guaranteed their retirement, their pension, and other benefits they might need. Just like Brazil's Social Security system. What did Claudio Castro do? He went into the public servants fund, and he stole and took almost $1 billion reais and shoved it up that devil Daniel Valcaro's ass and bought bad stocks and said, no, we're investing so the money will grow. That's a lie, because he bought bad stocks. Just like Ibanez Rocha bought more than 12 billion in bad stocks from Banco Master. It's interesting that the other day, one of you asked me in the comments, Andrea, what about public servants now? From Rio de Janeiro, won't they have their pension and retirement guaranteed, Andrea Gonçalves? Of course, their pension and retirement will be guaranteed. Because since it was the lousy government that did this, the government will have to get money from the treasury and make sure that the public employees, the civil servants of Rio de Janeiro, are not harmed. They will be held accountable, and they will have to cover the loss from the theft. So they'll need to get it from somewhere else. That's the situation. The public servants won't be left unprotected or harmed. The ones who will have to pay are the people of Rio de Janeiro. Yes, they'll have to pay again. Why? Because they stole, they diverted money that shouldn't have been diverted to buy a totally fraudulent situation. That's the situation. Another Bolsonaro supporter. But Claudio Castro's situation, if you think about it, is even worse than Ibanez Rocha's. Why, Andrea? Because in Rio de Janeiro's case, there are other entanglements. There are other suspicious situations. Here, look. Involving other criminal organizations, such as, for example, involvement with Militia and involvement with the Red Command, where Tiago Arroyas, a former state representative from Claudio Castro's political group, is already imprisoned. State Representative Rodrigo Bacelar, former president of the Legislative Assembly of Rio de Janeiro, is already imprisoned. And they're all from the same political group. And guess who is also part of this political group? I'll send you a kiss if you get it right. Who is part of this political group in Rio de Janeiro? Oh no. Go ahead, say it. Remember Bolsonaro, Italy and all that? I'll give you a hint. Rodrigo Bacelar, who's in jail, former president of the Legislative Assembly, he received a medal from Bolsonaro, the Never Goes Soft and Never Dies medal. And he already had the blessing of the Bolsonaro family. He had already met with Flávio Bolsonaro several times. If you search for it, Rodrigo Bacelar and Flávio Bolsonaro, you'll find a bunch of photos of meetings and encounters between the two. They're from the same political group in Rio de Janeiro. Cláudio Castro, Flávio Bolsonaro, Rodrigo Bacelar, Thiago Arroias, and Bolsonaro himself. So much so that Cláudio Castro came up with a strategy while he was governor to make sure of it, that whoever would take over the government of the state of Rio de Janeiro when he stepped down, because he didn't think he would be impeached or become ineligible. When he stepped down to run for the Senate, what did he do? He did everything so that Rodrigo Bacelar would take over the government of the state of Rio de Janeiro, because he would have the power in his hands and he could run for governor of the state of Rio de Janeiro as the successor of Cláudio Castro, with the blessing of the Bolsonaros and Bolsonaro's choice of Rodrigo Bacelar. So what did Cláudio Castro do? He took his lieutenant governor out of the picture. He took his lieutenant governor and appointed him as a member of the Rio de Janeiro State Court of Auditors. I don't know if you know, but one of the best public positions in Brazil is at the Court of Auditors. It's a lifetime position, pays very well, and has almost the same status as a minister. So he took his vice and appointed his lieutenant governor to the Rio de Janeiro State Court of Auditors. The lieutenant governor's post became vacant. It was left vacant. What does that mean? That when he resigned, stepped down 6 months before the election, which would be April 4th, who would take over? Rodrigo Bacelar. And Rodrigo Bacelar would have the state machinery of Rio de Janeiro in his hands and could still run for governor of Rio de Janeiro, succeeding Cláudio Castro exactly. Is that enough for you, or do you want more? But they didn't count on the federal police uncovering the scheme. Involvement with the militia or involvement with the Red Command. And that's why T.H. Joyce was arrested and Rodrigo Bacelar was arrested. And for electoral crimes, Cláudio Castro has had his mandate revoked and is ineligible. Soon he'll be arrested. You can be sure of that. Then you say, Andrea, it's over. No, it's not over. Now the federal police are investigating this involvement with the Red Command and with the militia in Rio de Janeiro. From this group of Cláudio Castro, I repeat, the same political group as Bolsonaro in Rio de Janeiro, it was just discovered that they committed fraud in education. Have you noticed that whenever there's fraud, it's either in education or in health? Do you know why? No, Andrea Gonçalves, why? That's where the most money is. By law, 18% of the entire budget has to go to education. Municipality, state, federal government. And by law, 15% of the entire budget has to go to healthcare. That's why when you see a fraud, you can be sure it's either in healthcare or in education. Why? Because there's a lot of money involved. Then, as the police investigated the whole situation, they discovered that they were embezzling money from education in a massive scheme involving millions and millions of reais. And another one has already been arrested. An ally of Cláudio Castro and Rodrigo Bacelar. Who, Andrea? Another state representative? Oh my God, another state representative was arrested. Who is it, Andrea? This one. Look, I'll show you his face. Alexandre de Moraes even made a decision yesterday. It's Tiago. Here, look. Tiago Rangel was arrested for involvement in this situation. State representative from the same political group as Rodrigo Bacelar, which also includes Flávio Bolsonaro and Claudio Castro. He was arrested because he discovered a situation involving one secretary after another. Several people were arrested in this case, and the state representative has just been arrested for involvement in this other situation here. Then you ask, Andrea, and is it over? No. So what happened then? Legislative Assembly of Rio de Janeiro. Given this situation, instead of confirming the arrest of Tiago Rangel, what did the Legislative Assembly of Rio de Janeiro do, Andrea? They voted for him to be released from jail. Who, Andrea? Tiago Rangel, from the same political group behind all these schemes I'm telling you about. Legislative Assembly of Rio de Janeiro, which apparently is dominated by criminal organizations. They held a vote and they approved the release of Tiago Rangel from jail. What happened? In this case, they held a vote to release him. According to Article 53 of the Federal Constitution, it says the following, that parliamentarians have parliamentary immunity, and if a parliamentarian is arrested, whether a senator or a deputy, the respective house to which he... Let's leave this thing aside, okay? In case he is arrested, the respective house to which he is affiliated can release him from prison. With a majority of votes from the relevant legislative house, and they held the vote to release Tiago Rangel. That's right. What happened regarding that? Alexandre de Moraes said, like, no. Wait, what do you mean, Andrea? Alexandre de Moraes is disobeying the Constitution then, Andrea? Alexandre de Moraes said he won't allow it. You might ask, Andrea Gonçalves, why is this entire investigation in the Federal Supreme Court? What is the origin of this whole investigation? Guess where it started? Guess where all of this started? The DPF das Favelas case. Do you recall the DPF das Favelas case? That ended up there in the Federal Supreme Court? That's right. It all came from the DPF das Favelas case, notably with the death of 121 people there in Morro da Penha and Alemão. Do you remember last year? That's right. Were there people there who were criminals, Andrea? Obviously there were. But there were also people there who had nothing to do with organized crime, nothing to do with anything. All of this started from that. There is a suspicion in this investigation that it was a cover-up by Claudio Castro to help the Red Command. And all of this is in the same investigation process. É mole ou quer mais? Then Alexandre de Moraes said he wouldn't release him. Wait, Andre, can Alexandre de Moraes do that if the Constitution says he has to release him, Andre? Let me tell you something. This rule that's in the Constitution, Article 53 about parliamentary immunity, refers to the possibility of releasing a parliamentarian from jail when they're arrested for political reasons. Chicas. Related to the office of a deputy or senator. Yes. If the reason he's arrested has nothing to do with politics, but instead with ordinary crimes. Which are embezzlement, theft, homicide, femicide, criminal organization, money laundering, and all of that situation. Justice Alexandre de Moraes found that the release of State Deputy Tiago Rangel is not appropriate, and he has already decided, I'm not going to release him. This criminal organization is extremely dangerous. There is a risk of escape, a risk of witness intimidation, of silencing witnesses, and I won't release him. You don't get it? The trouble is serious. Things are getting out of hand. Then you say to me, Andrea, what about Alexandre de Moraes? Seriously, is he right? Let me tell you something. This rule of parliamentary immunity is provided for in the federal constitution, which aim to give a certain protection to deputies and senators who are parliamentarians at the highest level of power in Brazil, the federal legislature. So what did the legislative assemblies do? They took it and applied it to the legislative assemblies to create a kind of shield for state representatives. Then the federal Supreme Court in part takes that view, and so do the jurists and constitutionalists, and I understand it that way too. I understand that this mirror provision may not apply to state representatives. And if it does apply, if it offers protection, it will only be in political matters regarding the execution of their parliamentary activities, and not a shield for committing crimes. How this legal mechanism is being used by the legislative assemblies of Brazil in general, where the representative gets involved sometimes in common crimes, corruption, embezzlement, money laundering. Then the guy gets arrested and the legislative assembly decides that he has to be released. And Alexandre de Moraes said in his decision, Brazil's Supreme Court has to deal with this. And it has to set the constitutional limits for this. And I'm not going to release the lawmaker. And this decision by Minister Alexandre de Moraes will now go through the first panel. And the first panel will confirm, I believe unanimously, Minister Alexandre de Moraes' decision. Because, guys, it doesn't make any sense. And we know that, unfortunately, once again, the history of Rio de Janeiro repeats itself, where the Legislative Assembly is much more like Alibaba and the 40 Thieves. Just ask the former governor who left. Today, Andrea, the person in office, like the former governor, has been removed from office, declared ineligible, and is out. Since there is no vice governor, the one who would take over is the president of the Legislative Assembly. The president of the Legislative Assembly is in jail. Who took over in the line of succession? The president of the Court of Justice, Ricardo Couto. And Ricardo Couto is conducting a thorough investigation in Rio de Janeiro. And you can be sure Claudio Castro will be arrested. Ibanez Rocha, the former governor of the federal district, and Celina Leão, the current governor of the federal district, will also very likely be arrested. And the federal police started knocking at the highest levels at the home of a senator and former Bolsonaro minister. After I've explained all this to you, I just have one question to ask you. Is the Banco master fraud a Bolsa master, or oh no? If you understand it as Bolsa master, what does that mean, Andrea? The Bolsonaristas are involved up to here, up to the hair on their heads. It's not just up to their necks, it's up to the hair on their heads. Bolsonaristas are involved all the way. And I believe, given this whole chain of events, that there are no coincidences. What exists are consequences. And at this rate, even Flávio Bolsonaro, and especially Bolsonaro himself, will be involved. Fraud. Then I look at it and think, guys, really? The world doesn't turn, guys. The world flips over. Have you ever stopped to think that suddenly Andre Mendonça is soon going to order the arrest of a bunch of Bolsonaro supporters? The world doesn't just turn, it flips over. Then you ask me, Andrea, like this, Andrea, really? If there is, he will do it. Do you know why? Do you know? He won't put himself on the line. Because of Bolsonaro's no. He's already there and will stay there as a minister. And if he puts himself on the line, he's the one who falls. Because the federal police are doing an excellent job and the prosecutor general is there keeping a close watch. That's the situation. Now, I'm not going to lie. The second panel of the Federal Supreme Court as a whole is responsible for judging all these situations. Except Claudio Castro. Alexandre de Moraes is in the first panel. But in the case of Ibanez Rocha, the case of Daniel Vorcaro, the competent court is the second panel of the Federal Supreme Court. And then we need to stay alert and keep our eyes wide open. Because there we have Andre Mendonça, the rapporteur, Nunes Marquez, Luis Fuchs. Here we already have the majority, 3 Bolsonaro supporters. And there are Dias Toffoli and Gilmar Mendes. That's concerning. Regarding the first panel, we can relax. Alexandre de Moraes, Flávio Dino, Carmen Lúcia, and Zanin. That's fine. But the second panel, I have my doubts. But in this area, I have something to say. The world doesn't spin, it flips over. And let's wait to see what happens. Check Alexandre Moraes' decision. Moraes forbids the Legislative Assembly of Rio de Janeiro from releasing the state lawmaker and keeps Tiago Rangel in jail. And Moraes reminded that in 13 arrests of state representatives for offenses unrelated to the exercise of their mandate, 12 were overturned, 8 of them in the state of Rio de Janeiro. In his view, it is not reasonable, nor is it appropriate to automatically apply in this specific case the immunity provided for in the Constitution of the state of Rio de Janeiro, especially when its nature is distorted. To perpetuate impunity for real criminal organizations embedded within government instead of protecting the independence of public power. Instead of protecting the independence of the legislative branch, this parliamentary immunity and these actions by legislative assemblies trying to get state representatives out of jail. Actually, it is inadequate, disproportionate, and Justice Alexandre Moraes said so. I'm not going to release him. He will remain in prison. That, my dear, signals that the situation is much more serious than we imagine. And we only know a tiny bit. Are you done, Andrea? No. There's one more who was arrested. Oh, Jesus, turn on the light. Look here. Former Chief of Staff of Rodrigo Bacelar, Rui Bulhões, is arrested by the federal police. The operation investigates fraud in education and targets Rodrigo Bacelar's allies. It's that situation where Tiago Rangel is in jail. He was arrested and Alexandre Moraes hasn't said he's going to release him. And now this one also from Rodrigo Bacelar's office, one of his advisors was also arrested. You can put that up. Claudio Castro will be next. Claudio Castro. And also put that up. Where is Ibanez Rocha? And here's the thing. They're all Bolsonaro supporters. All about guns, violence, and chaos, saying the only good criminal is a dead one. And there they were, on their knees, on Communion Day, at Silas Malafaya's church. All of them right there, see? It's all mixed together.